Tervetuloa seuraamaan RTV:n Maailmankuvia-sarjaa. Tänään meillä on Yhdysvalloista vieraana Steve Glanz. Tämä seuraava keskustelu tullaan käymään englannin kielellä. Hello, Steven.
Hello. How are you?
It's very nice to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, you are coming from United States.
Yes.
Is this your first visit in Finland?
Absolutely. My first time in Finland ever.
Very nice. So let's go to straight to the business. Yeah. In this show, we are talking about your spiritual background, your spiritual journey, and also those projects what you are doing.
Yes.
So let's start with those background of yours. That who is Steve Glanz, where he comes from, and what kind of background he has.
And thanks for asking. So, all right, so I was born in 1953 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a city in the United States. And I lived in Pittsburgh until I was about 28. When I was 17, I started getting interested in, I was reading in the newspaper a column called ESP and U. ESP means extrasensory perception. Mm-hmm. Somebody would write it in the daily paper. And I found it to be very interesting. Although my background was very classical, scientific, all that sort of thing. And then at one time in this article, they announced that there would be a meeting for somebody speaking for the Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE. And this was the organization supporting Edgar Cayce. Now, Edgar Cayce was an American psychic who lived, did most of his psychic readings, the 1920s to the 1940s. Many, many readings, and he was very accurate. He went into prehistory, did a lot of healings, he did a lot of one-on-one counseling. He was one of the most famous channeler psychics of all time. And so I got involved with the readings, I read the books, I got involved with their groups and practices, and that opened up the whole aspect of spirituality for me. And the group was very open and eclectic, and that fit my personality very well, because I'm also very eclectic. And part of the practices was meditation, and it's a little bit a mix between Christianity and Eastern mysticism, with a lot of metaphysics involved. Mm-hmm. So that opened the door for me. I'm not the person that tends to jump in and become very focused on one particular organization. To me, that feels sort of scary, like a cult, you know. Yeah. So I used it as a jumping off point, and I got involved over the years in many, many different spiritual studies, metaphysical, paranormal, and it was always a hobby. At one point, it went a little bit beyond a hobby. I took up the hobby of astrology, and I learned astrology, and I started doing a few professional readings, but mostly private and for my friends and family. But I really got very involved in Western astrology, a little bit of Eastern, a little bit of other types of astrology, but I found it just to be a very fascinating field of study, because you can map it on just about anything: sciences, philosophy, arts, psychology. Just an amazing entry point into understanding how everything works. So that opened up more things for me. And then when I was 19, I decided that Pittsburgh was a little bit too provincial for me, and I wanted to go to the big time. Well, at that time, what was the big time? California. That's where all the action was in the spiritual and metaphysical world. So I got in a car and I drove out to California. That's about 2,500 miles, and didn't know where I was going or where I was going to land. And I landed in San Francisco, mm-hmm. and immediately I found that there was a school that teaches people how to do psychic readings. Oh. And I thought, well, if Edgar Cayce can do it, so can I. So I took the school. It was about a year training, and I found it came fairly easily for me, and got lots of practice. Did a few paid professional, but mostly, again, just for my own personal spiritual development and counseling for other people. And I also, in my practice of astrology, I found the two went together very well. Because when you do an astrology reading, well, there's so much there, many ways to interpret the same symbols that it can drive you crazy. But if you use a little bit of intuition, you can hone in on the symbols that are the most important for what's going on in the reading. So a few years later, I was looking for a mission, something that I could say, what's really important? What do I want to do? And I started off with, wouldn't it be nice if we could all just communicate with each other telepathically, like the whole planet? Mm-hmm. Then we wouldn't need telephones or anything like that. And I taught one class in telepathy, and it didn't work out so well, but I gave up. And then I was exposed to something else that was quite interesting. And it's a field of research called electronic voice phenomena, EVP. And now they also use another term for it called instrumental transcommunication. And so what it is, and this field has been around for many, many years, maybe about 100 years or 120 years. But it's still not very well known in the spiritual community. And so the idea is, now many people don't believe that there is anything beyond physical existence. We die and that's the end of it. But some people think maybe we don't die. Maybe we continue to live, but in some other existence, in another dimension or another plane. And to get, if you want to communicate with people or other beings on the other side, how do you do it? Well, maybe you'll have an intuition or a dream. Maybe you go to a professional medium. But there's a third way. You can use technology.
Well, I remember one movie actually about it. It was Michael Keaton and White Noise.
Yes.
It was about this electric voice phenomenon.
Yes.
Have you seen it?
I have seen the movie, and I know Tom Butler, who was the consultant in EVP on that movie. He and I are very good friends, and we've talked and written about a lot of in that topic. So I'm glad you saw that movie. Wow. That's good. That shows that you know a lot. So anyway, so that opened up my interest in asking certain questions. Well, if you can communicate with the other side, that means, well, maybe we don't have to all be perfectly spiritually enlightened in order to jump those dimensions. Maybe everybody can do it. What if we could create technology that opened up those portals entirely, for everybody? We could communicate, we could see them in pictures, maybe they could even materialize and come here and we could go there, and maybe the whole game would change. There wouldn't be any sort of boundary anymore between physical existence and non-physical existence. There could be transportation back and forth, communication back and forth. And just think of the possibilities. What would that open up? And there are many aspects to this. So if you really study this and you read about what happens on the other side or in other dimensions, physics is a little bit different there. Time and space, not exactly the same. They take on a different quality. For example, and we were talking to your good friend Martin Heitel just the other day, and what he was reminding me is that we think of time as being linear, but when you go into this other plane, maybe the astral plane or whatever you want to call it, it's not linear anymore. Everything is more like space. You see everything that's happened in time in one place and you experience it at one time. That's what people experience when they go through the life review after they die. It's like their whole life they see it all at once because that's the way it is. So this opens up another question, and the question is about physics. How do we understand the nature of reality? Is it what we think it is? And for many years we've been evolving our sciences, and we started off with Newtonian physics, and as time went on we had Einstein, who was the source for both relativity and quantum physics, and now of course quantum physics is becoming sort of very popular in metaphysical circles.
Sure.
We call it quantum mysticism, right? Where we see things like non-locality, where when you think about when you give a thought, when you measure particles, they appear in two places at one time.
Yes.
It's very unusual. So
quantum entanglement.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So it occurred to me that we have a problem in the sciences, and this is a problem for me personally too, because I have a degree in biochemistry, and I had a rather diverse career. I worked in the sciences, I worked in the legal field, I worked in technology, and did all kinds of things. But I'm very much, interested in science as a method of getting at truth. It's not the only method. There's also philosophy and, meditation and all these other things. But the scientific method is very good, and we've developed a lot from it. But we have the sort of the hard sciences and the mainstream sciences, and then we have the spiritual sciences, and people who in the ancient religions who have developed very intricate methods of personal development. They draw diagrams of what kind of energy field is around your body in great detail. The various planes of existence. You see this a lot in Hinduism, for example, but in other spiritual traditions as well. And when you examine these traditions, they appear to be very scientific, and yet there's a barrier between these two worlds. And so what we're exploring now is the frontier of what we call the theory of everything, right?
Yeah.
How does it all fit together, right? And what we need to do is to have the mainstream community of scientists begin to take seriously all these other subtle energies, life after death, paranormal phenomena, those kinds of things. And for the people in the spiritual community to take a more scientific approach, to take their observations and submit them to a more scientific practice.
Yeah.
So I'm leading a little bit up to something. What I find with a lot of people, and this was my experience too, a lot of people in the spiritual community are very interested in developing themselves spiritually. And that's great. I think we all need to do that. But it also means that most of the rest of the world is not doing that. And so the people who are going to evolve spiritually are the people in our community who are working on this. And how is that going to really change the planet? It might change the planet. Maybe one avatar, one great teacher can make a change. But generally speaking, it takes a collective. How do we engage the whole collective of the planet in this kind of change, spiritual evolution and scientific evolution at the same time? And the way I frame it is, we need to engage in the times that we live. Every period in history has something really special about it. Every culture in every period of history has something unique about it. What is unique about this time and place? Technology, science and technology. It's not universal. There are many people not involved with it. Not everybody is on the internet, but like 3 billion people on Facebook, that's a good chunk of the population right now, right?
Well, it is. It
yes.
is actually.
And how many, maybe 4 billion people on smartphones? I don't know, right? So there's a huge collective consciousness right now around technology. And so I think not only should we answer the question of the theory of everything by taking the spiritual sciences and everything else together and trying to find those answers in a cross-disciplinary way, but we should also find ways of applying that information through our technologies, such as with ITC, instrumental transcommunication, as being one of those things, so that we can develop collectively, spiritually, in a global sense, and personally as well. So that's kind of my introduction to what my mission is.
So you are working now with the electronic voice phenomena, and What kind of tools you actually use for it, and how those tools has been developed?
Yes,
for it?
and thank you for asking. Now, I will admit to you that I purposely try not to do too much of that on my own. I've had personal experiences with EVP and ITC, done some experiments. I even did a series of lectures that got written up in a local newspaper. I did some wonderful experiments with what they call visual ITC, which is you take a television set and you take another television set and you aim them at each other and you create a kind of a feedback loop that creates a lot of static. And in that static, you begin to see pictures, right? And what's really happening there, one of the theories that we're dealing with is that when there is chaos, which is static, is a kind of a noise or kind of a chaos, that is the place where spiritual or beings from the other side can interfere with that. It seems sort of counterintuitive. You think there would need to be order, but in fact there needs to be a type of noise for that to happen. So I did a little bit of that, but I didn't want to do what other researchers were doing, which is just doing a lot of experiments. And the reason is because the state of the art right now is not very developed. What people are doing in ITC right now is there's a certain procedure you go through with tape recorders or televisions or whatever, and you get voices or you get pictures or maybe sometimes computer text or something like that. And it's hit or miss. You have to wait and you have to replay it. You don't know when it's going to happen, and when it does happen, you have to listen very carefully. And they even classify the phenomena as A, B, C, and D. A is the best voices, B is maybe not so good, C is we're not even sure what they're saying. So there's all of this sort of procedure and science around it, and that's not good enough for me. I'm really not interested in just doing more and more of that and getting more messages. A lot of the people in the field are interested in the messages because they're doing grief counseling. They bring people in. I want to hear from my grandmother on the other side what she tells me, and now I feel better, just like going to a medium. So that's not my interest, or just doing more of the same. My interest is bringing together a community, a cross-disciplinary community of scientists, metaphysicians, philosophers, and just about anything you can think of to solve this problem. And I see it as what we call in America a moonshot. So in America, it was back in the 1960s, there was a competition between Russia and the United States.
Yes.
Who can go to the moon first in a spaceship? And the United States won the race. They got there first. But they got there because the government put a lot of money into doing a lot of research on space technology. And so I use the term moonshot for this type of a project because I think it is so important that we can evolve collectively as a species and answer so many questions. Think about, for example, if you could talk to Einstein. Let's say Einstein, maybe he's reincarnated, but maybe there's some other replica of Einstein out there on the astral plane that has...
What we could learn from him.
We could learn from him. What about Buddha, What if he's still there on the astral, or some thought form of Buddha or something? There's just, an amazing amount of growth that could happen from this. And so I don't know if that answers your initial question, or if I've kind of, gone somewhere else with it. But so that's kind of my goal right now. And, I would like to say that living in Northern California gives me hope, because it's one of the most, I live in Marin County, and Marin County in the Bay Area is one of the most affluent places on Earth. And there's a lot of money going into technology startups. They call the greater Bay Area Silicon Valley, because all the technology companies are there, and there's a lot of money. And I see people investing in a lot of very futuristic ideas that might not even work, but they're putting the money into it. They're putting the money into driverless cars. Is that ever really going to happen? Maybe.
Well, I guess it already do something like
It already
Google
is, but on a
has-
mass scale, we'll see. You know, but I think we need to. What I want to do is to persuade people of how important this type of frontier science is, and maybe we can raise some money, start a company, and do things like that.
Yes. In Finland, this EVP is not so familiar and not so popular, but it does happen between those in those coast investigation groups. They have some kind of coast box which scanning radio
Yes.
frequencies
Right.
and so on, and some other kind of infrared systems and so on.
Yes.
Is this famous and popular EVP in United States?
Yes, thanks for asking. So I want to make a distinction between ghost research
Yes.
and ITC. And the difference is mainly what is the goal, right? In ITC, the goal has been creating technology to communicate with the other side and developing that technology. A lot of it's used for, grief counseling and things like that. In ghost research, it's going out and hunting for ghosts,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And some of ghost research is not very serious. It's people trying to get on television shows and creating entertainment.
Yes. Same as in Finland.
My friend Tom Butler, who consulted on the movie, he was happy with the movie, but what he saw that happened after that became more entertainment. So there are aspects of the ITC community that are more like the ghost research entertainment community, right? They're not serious researchers.
Well, in this movie, they was turning like a dramatic purposes that the
Yes.
people dies there who was
Exactly.
yeah.
And I do have friends who are ghost researchers. Barry Taff was one of the pioneers in that in Southern California many years ago. Lloyd Auerbach is another friend of mine who lives in Northern California, who's written books and done amazing amounts of research in that as well. And there is some convergence between the ghost research community and the ITC community. And as you say, the instrumentation is part of it, right?
Yes.
Some of the instrumentation that's used in ghost research can also be used in ITC. But I think there's a lot of room for developing more instruments, better instruments, and part of that's going to be understanding the technology. One of the questions we have in ITC and in the greater question of theory of everything is, what is the role of consciousness in all of this, you know? And of course, this question is asked a lot in our community. In ITC, for example, we notice that the best results happen with people who are naturally psychic, naturally mediumistic. They have that natural ability and they can get messages, right? It also happens if they do things the right way, they set the right intention, they set the right atmosphere, this sort of thing. So we call that the operator effect. So there's some kind of interchange going on between the operator, the person who's working with the equipment, and the equipment, right? And I think that's fascinating. I would love to separate those out. I would love it to just be completely technological so that the operator effect goes away. And, because when you're on the telephone, you don't have to have any special mental skills. You're just talking on the telephone, right? And that's the way I'd like to see EVP really work, to be so ubiquitous and universal that we don't need anything of that. I'm not sure it's going to happen that way. This is an open question. I was talking to a friend of yours the other day, and we were talking about one of the many theories of reality. And one of the theories is the simulation hypothesis, that it's all consciousness, and we're all in part of a big computer, right? And we might need to take that into consideration. One interesting thing to look at is the role of ancient technologies, and I'm thinking particularly of magic. In magic, I mean, Wicca, paganism. Many of the religions have certain rituals they use, and they use things called sympathetic magic. They use objects that become loaded with certain types of energies and things like that. So this is one way our ancestors have found to create portals to the other side, to create, you know, miracles and other kinds of magical things that happen, because they understood how that works. A lot of the indigenous populations of the world have magic, right? And so what I'm about is upgrading that magic, bringing it up to current technology, you know? And there's so much that's going on. Every day I read in scientific and academic journals about some new discovery in quantum physics and things that they're applying now to you know, quantum computing and artificial intelligence. And I just think we need to start applying it to these kind of spiritual questions as well, and these broader philosophical questions.
Well, maybe quantum physics will be that kind of bridge builder between spirituality and science.
Yes.
Who knows in future?
Right.
At least it already explains many of those phenomena.
Yes.
If we thinking about a little moment about this, that having cell phone that they call it dead,
Yes.
dead
Yes.
people. Millions of people are thinking about that. It is only way to read and develop your own consciousness to reach the connection. If we all get smartphones and connection to the other side, what will happen to our spiritual development?
Yes, that's an interesting question. You know, they say that if something comes too easy, then maybe you don't grow as a soul, you know? But I would argue that, you know, the same argument is used for every technology that's ever been developed, you know? What happens, you know, if we have cars? Now we don't have our horses and carts anymore, and what's going to happen to the world? It's going to become too fast, you know? What happens if we have electricity? I mean, everybody, there's a sort of an anti-technology argument. And my answer is, you know, there's a natural curiosity that we have. You know, we evolve as humans because we are curious. We ask questions. And as we discover new things, yes, any technology can be abused. But I think all in all, in the end, it's going to be a good thing. One of the problems, and this is very interesting, as I've studied metaphysics over the years, I hear a lot of people, you know, talking about the good versus the evil, right? There are good guys and bad guys. There's maybe even a cosmic drama going on. You know, the religionists like to call it like the God and the devil, you know, or, you know, good and evil. In the metaphysics community, you see people coming up with entire narratives about what's happening, you know, on the other side. There's these, you know, groups that will just steal your soul and put it in some kind of a little place, and beware when you go to the other side. You know, there's this conspiracy of, you know, evil demons and extraterrestrials doing all kinds of things. And I think maybe one of the reasons they get away with it is because they have this esoteric knowledge. And maybe it's also technological. When we think about our extraterrestrial friends, they seem to have some handle on technology, after all. And what we need to do is to level the playing field. Let's get it so that everybody gets the secrets, everybody knows how to do it. And once you shine a light on that, then, you know, the bad guys don't have the tools anymore to do what they need to do.
Yeah, and one thing that, of course, when you are proved that death is not ending point, many people doesn't fear to death anymore.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a point that I overlooked that I wanted to talk about before. So you're very intuitive as an interviewer. So, you know, if you want to really ask the question seriously and with an open mind, are there other dimensions? Are there fairies and beings and angels and ETs and people that die and continue to exist? The answers are there. And I mean scientifically. You know, the out-of-body experience research, the near-death experience research, you know, the ITC research. It's all there, and it's, you know, you just have to look for it in the books, in the scholarly journals. It's there. But a lot of people don't look there. They're the skeptics, or what I call the pseudo-skeptics, because they don't even want to ask the question, or they have some expertise in some other field, and they think that allows them to be an expert in this field, right? And so, what's the best way to prove something to somebody like that? Well, you don't have to prove how it works, you just have to prove that it works, right?
Yes.
And what better way than a technology, right? When, again, I use the talking on the phone, because we've used that as an analogy, as a metaphor before. Maybe we don't know exactly how the electrons work. There's still questions about
how does it affect in our supercomputer?
How it affects our supercomputer, even how the electrons go through the wires or fly through the air. We think we understand the science of all that, but if you really ask scientists, they'll say, well, maybe we don't entirely understand. We're still trying to figure that out. But we don't question that there is electricity. We don't question that there are radio waves and other types of waves. So what I'm saying is, with spiritual phenomena, if you want to convert the skeptics, what better way than to invent something and make something that's a replicable, ubiquitous technology that everybody can use? So I hope that answered your question on that.
Well, I guess it does.
Yes.
About other areas what you have been searching, it's you already mentioned astrology.
Yes.
And what else there were? What you have been working on?
Yeah, as I say, I'm pretty eclectic. So I don't, I actually, my wife and I set up a speakers forum from about 2005 to 2013, and it was the purpose of it is we saw at the time that a lot of speakers were moving online, and now you have even more. Like this show is online, right? But we felt that there was still a need for the live presentations, the live meetings, the live conferences. There's a conference happening here this weekend. So we wanted to have a speakers forum for metaphysics. So we had the ROM, I call it the ROM Metaphysical Exploration Group. And we had about maybe 70 or 80 speakers once a month over a period of 5 years. And every one of those was a topic that I was personally interested in, some more than others, right? But I'll give you an example of some of the speakers we had. We were interested in what they call psychokinesis, also known as PK. And one of the most interesting ways to do PK is, and to demonstrate it in a fun way, is through bending spoons.
Like a Uri Geller.
Like Uri Geller, which I
have met actually, and done a show with him.
That's amazing. He must have been a very interesting person to interview. But he sort of popularized it, but other people do it now too. And there was a guy named Jack Houck who did some really deep scientific research on this, and he started these PK parties. And then other people started doing PK parties. So I had a PK facilitator at one of my groups, and the idea is you go through a certain procedure. It's group energy, getting excited, believing in yourself, putting intention, and then you bend the spoon, right? It can be a spoon, a fork, a knife, it can be nails, whatever. And you can see that if you try to do it just normally, it's very hard to bend it. But if you go through this process, it bends really easily. So that's called psychokinesis, which is mind over matter, the ability of the mind to affect matter. And if you look on a microscopic level at some of these spoons, you see that the actual metal atoms, it's kind of melted like you would have sent a microwave through it. Which kind of reminds you a little bit about crop circles, right? Yeah. There seems to be something like microwaves or some kind of waves that are making these crop circle happens, and when you look at the stalks, it looks like they're being bent or melted in some kind of microwave feature. So again, the effect of consciousness on matter. So that was one of the groups we had. I had another speaker, and this is another topic of interest, immortality, physical immortality. Now, I've been talking about immortality by being able to cross over and come back and do it consciously and not forget everything. Because right now, we don't remember our past lives. We don't remember our in-between lives unless we really are gifted at that, or have a hypnotherapist, or we're very intuitive, or a good psychic or something. But the idea is, I'm kind of sort of losing my train of thought here, but the idea is physical immortality is also important. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like life is too short.
Sometimes it feels like it.
Yes.
Especially when you are having some illness or something.
Yeah. And, to accomplish what you want to accomplish, it feels like we need to live at least 1,000 years, maybe more, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm proud to say that in the city where I live, Novatossa, California, there is the Buck Institute on Aging, and they're investigating physical aging and quality of life and extending it, on a biochemical level. So that's really one aspect of it. But there are people who are spiritually gifted, certain yogis who do certain practices, who have become essentially immortal. And one of my speakers at this group talked about this. This speaker, and I guess it was a couple, him and his wife, they traveled all over the world, especially India, because India seems to be where all that goes on. They've had a tradition that goes back thousands and thousands of years continuously, and so they preserved a lot of these techniques. And he met several people who, have essentially become immortal. And they all did it a little bit differently. One of them, he was able to make friends with Shiva, which is a deity in the Hindu religion, and Shiva said, fire is the answer. Just you don't need to eat, you don't need to drink, just lay on fire, and you'll get the energy you need. So this person does that, and he seems to have attained some sort of immortality. There was another person that he met. I'm trying to remember. It's a yogi, and he's still in India, and he has an ashram, and he's been demonstrated, proven to be, a couple thousand years old. And how he does it is every 100 years, he buries himself in a kind of a little grave or cave or something like that, and he kind of redoes his whole. He kind of, dissolves himself. He kind of does a resurrection in a way, kind of goes into his astral body and then reconstitutes himself and then comes back about every 100 years. So that's another method. And this guy was a king in some of the ancient Vedic scriptures. And he's still there, as a yogi and teaching people at his ashram. And I'm trying to remember another one and how he did it. Well, there's a technique, and it's actually written about, it's a very specific technique where you go into a cave for about 6 months or a year or something like that. And it's completely dark. And I don't know, there's some other things that go on there, but you come out and you're completely renovated. You're young again. You've lost maybe 30 or 40 years of your life, So anyway, just to answer your question, that was another type of speaker we had.
Yeah.
And
Well, it has been very fascinating to have this conversation with
Yes.
you. Before we finish this interview, do you have something? What would you like to say to our Finnish audience? Like some special ideas, tips, whatever, advices, whatever.
Well, I'm visiting Finland for the first time, and I've been touring around, and it's a wonderful country. And I'm just discovering now the metaphysical side of Finland, and I want to know more about it. And I really feel that all the countries of the world need to engage with each other. Every country has something special to offer, and investigators who are unique. And so I'm sort of a natural networker, and I hope to be able to meet interesting people. And I invite Finns who are into metaphysics to come to America. And Americans to come to Finland and discover this wonderful place.
Well, thanks for your kind words.
Yes.
And I have to say that right now you are in the right place, because here is hundreds of people in Ultrapäivät who are spiritually oriented.
Yes.
Thank you for your visit.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah.